Morning, everyone. I hope you're well and that you're still coping okay in these lockdown times. My hair still hasn't grown back. I'm getting a bit concerned. Anyway, I thought I'd talk you through how to evaluate the positive approach, and let me just take you through the basic process. And we've got some decent resources on this, so this should be fairly straightforward for you. Okay, so big picture wise, you need to be able to evaluate the approach. You need to show that you understand what's good about it, what's bad about it, the strengths and weaknesses, and also you need to be able to compare it to other approaches and say this is maybe a more scientific approach than the Freudian approach, or this places more emphasis on free will than all the other approaches. So they're the kind of things that you need to be able to do. But you need to have a view, okay? So by the end of the tasks that we need to do, you should be able to have some real opinions about the positive approach. Okay, so you need to know clearly 3 strengths and weaknesses. So you need to know at least 3 strengths and weaknesses, and you need to be able to write each of those strengths and weaknesses into a 4-mark answer using the formula that we talked about quite a lot, okay? And you need to have your own views, like I say. Psychology, I think the word is interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to and it gives you the opportunity to express your opinions about things. And we don't have to agree about everything, but we do have to think about them. We do have to say what we think. Okay, so the process, this is how you're going to learn. So first of all, I'll talk you through the PowerPoint, but you've obviously got the opportunity to pause it and look at it and all the rest of it. So use the PowerPoint and the textbook to complete the 4-page handout that I've shared with you on Classroom, okay? And then once you've completed that 4-page handout, you can use that knowledge and understanding to complete the summary sheet, okay? And then the final thing to do, because we're preparing for an exam and all the rest of it, is that you need to be able to learn that summary sheet ready for the assessment. So I'll be putting an online assessment for you next week. So that's what you need to do. Okay, hopefully that's clear. What I've decided to do is every now and again, just to help myself imagine that I'm actually in a classroom situation, I might think to myself, oh, what might someone ask me here? And then if something occurs to me, then I will tell you the answer. But obviously, if you're not clear about anything, you need to be getting in touch using the school email. Okay. Yeah. Now, okay. So here's the evaluation formula. So this is the ultimate thing that you're going to need to be able to do. When we've talked about the 3 strengths and weaknesses, you need to be able to state what that strength or weakness is and explain that and say what it is in a sentence. Explain why that is a strength or a weakness of that approach, and then give a detailed example. Okay, so those are the 3 things that you need to do, and those are the 3 grids, 3 things that you've got in the grid in the big A3 sheet that I give you for these ones. Okay, so have a think to yourself. I'm not going to dwell on this. I'm just going to crack on. But are there any things that you like about the positive approach? Can you see any possible issues? Okay. Now, one fairly negative way of looking at the positive approach, just get my head out of the way there so you can see blood product. One fairly negative way of looking at the positive approach is to actually think, actually, you know what? All it's really about with the mindfulness, thinking about my own breath and thinking about my own life and the ideas of signature strengths, thinking about what I'm good at and thinking about my happiness. Some people would say that's a very just sort of American individualistic way of looking at life. And maybe a psychology that just thinks about that, an approach to psychology that only thinks about that kind of stuff isn't really good enough. Okay, so you have to think about what you think about that quote. Now, the positive approach doesn't actually try and explain behavior in the way that the biological approach would explain behavior through genes and chemicals and so forth, or the behaviorist approach would explain it through learning. So really, none of the debates are particularly important or useful, apart from the discussion about free will and determinism. And it very much, it's very much the most focused on free will of all the debates we've looked at. Okay, so have a look on your sheet and complete that section. But also, just a thought on free will. Free will is not without its downsides. It's great to be able to say, yeah, I can. And we all have a sense, don't we? We have a sense that I'm making a choice now. I'm making a choice now to sit and talk to you now. I haven't actually had my breakfast yet. And I'm making a choice to talk to you now. And then I'm going to go and have my breakfast. I'm kind of looking forward to it. But free will is not just the idea of choice is good, but free will is not without its downsides, yeah? Because if, for example, if we say that I can choose to be happy, that's one of the things that Seligman says, we can actually choose to be happy, then if I'm not happy, then that must be my fault, right? Now that is not particularly helpful to someone who's feeling unhappy, is it? Because they may have all the other reasons that are causing them to be unhappy. And then to feel that they're also responsible can actually be quite negative for them, yeah? It could just make things worse. So is it useful? So again, this is one of the ways that we can talk about the strengths of an approach. We can say, yeah, of course it's useful because it's helped human life in one way or another. And so we've got education down there, we've got people in uniform. So obviously mindfulness is being useful in terms of helping people with stress, helping them not to worry about things because they just spend time in the present moment and realize that they don't have to spend all their time worrying about what's going to happen in the future or beating themselves up about what's happened in the past. And so that's a really positive and helpful thing for people's mental health. Have a look in the book about how the cognitive approach has been applied by the American Army, in particular, in the military. And it's helped people cope with or go into battle situations and be more resilient in dealing with all those kind of things. So if soldiers are coming back from war zones and all the horrendous things that they must have seen in those places, if they come back and they don't feel, and they're not as damaged by that because they've been protected by mindfulness and the positive approach, that's a good thing. I've just noticed that it says, can you see that? It says cognitive approach there. That's wrong. That's a typing error, and it should say positive. I'm not going to fix it now. I'll fix it afterwards. Right? Okay, next one. How's the positive approach being applied in education? So in American schools, particularly, they have these positive psychology curricula where people actually learn about things like how to be resilient, how to be happier, and to focus on their signature strengths and all that kind of business, which would then, and there is research that sort of suggested that that's actually improved their performance academically in school and things like that. Okay, so that's a positive application. Don't forget though that we've also talked about when we looked at the debate. If we use those kind of things, if it is relevant in education, then maybe something else might have to go. So it might be squeezing other important things out of the curriculum. Okay. Is it scientific? Well, Seligman, if you remember when we watched that, watched the video right at the beginning when he did the TED talk, he talks about how they do the equivalent of randomized controlled trials. So you have people in two different groups and you do experiments and you see what kind of things can lead to people becoming happier. So on the one hand, it would seem to suggest that it is a scientific approach and it aims to be, but then the kind of thing that we're trying to measure, the actual idea of happiness, is very difficult. And can we really get hold of the idea of what it means to be happy? And to two people, if you ask two people, they're happy. They both might say yes, they are, but they might be happy in very different ways, or they might mean very different things. So there's more about that in the textbook. Imagine you would try to actually test that. Then that would also be a problem, wouldn't it? Okay. Another issue raised by people and raised by Lazarus in 2003 is that many of the studies in positive psychology are correlational. So that means if we remember that as one variable goes up, another variable goes up. So possibly you could say, for example, the more time people spend with friends and families, as one variable, more time I spend with friends and families, the happier I report myself to be. Okay. But as we remember from our studies of correlation does not mean, I'm listening, correlation does not mean causality. Do you remember we droned on and on about that? So just because one thing increases and something else increases, that doesn't mean that one thing is necessarily causing the other. So that's been criticised. So it makes it difficult for us to make conclusions about whether some things really make us happy or not, or whether there's something in between. However, that doesn't just happen in positive psychology. That happens in many areas of psychology. So it's a bit unfair to particularly single that one out. Okay. If you read a bit at the beginning on a shift in focus for psychology, that relates directly to that video, that Martin Seligman TED Talk, where he talks about instead of just really want to focus on people who are broken, who've got mental health issues or who've got psychological problems, psychology needs to also help people who are just who are okay, and help them to thrive and help them to become better and help them to discover their signature strengths and all those kind of things and become better, happier people. So you need to think about why that is a strength of this approach. On the other hand, we've got this idea that positive psychology is not a new idea, that some of the ideas of that have been taken up about people becoming their best selves and as good as they can be and thriving, that all goes back to the earlier approach of humanism. You might want to have a look in the textbook on that one and see where you stand on that. Okay. Other things, mindfulness came from Buddhism, so it starts off as a religious idea, and some people would say that actually, so the positive approach uses a religious approach, but it's actually kind of sucked all the religion out of it and just focuses on stuff like breathing and relaxation. So they're saying it's not a real full appropriate experience. And many might feel that Buddhism is being misrepresented by this way of presenting mindfulness. Some people say that it's like a cult, that people are going around, like hippies or any of those other kind of things. It's just a sort of peace and love thing or replacement for religion. But then that might be a misunderstanding of what positive psychology really is about, because a lot of anything that positive psychology does, it tends to be, any of the claims it makes tend to be based on scientific research and evidence. Okay. So if the positive approach is really focused on positive and happy emotions, then how does it deal with the fact that we all do experience negative emotions? We do experience sadness and anger and all those kinds of things. And often emotions are mixed. So an emotion like anger, for example, might seem like a completely unhelpful thing. When you think of all the personal feelings that you experience when you're angry, they're not particularly nice. However, we can actually be angry about things that we want to change, and anger could be a thing that makes us decide actually we're angry about people living out in the streets, for example. Anger might be the trigger that makes us go and actually do something about it. Being hopeful about life, which is a good thing, can also mean that we start to feel uncertain or anxious about what's going to happen in the future. Joy, as we know, doesn't last, as we saw in some of the research in Myers and Dina, that the actual sort of length of time that a really positive experience can really last for is about 3 months. Love, one of the most beautiful emotions that we can experience. If the other person doesn't love us, then that can be a heartbreaking experience. Like I say, anger can be positive if we need to assert ourselves. And then we've also got negative emotions that might have positive sides. Yeah, so that's another thing to be thinking about. So when it talks about cultivating positive emotions and be happy and healthy and wise, but other things can be useful too. Van Derzen, for example, suggests that negative emotions are necessary in some ways, and that positive psychology could benefit from being slightly more balanced when we think about emotions and how they work. Have a look at the stuff on individual differences on page 103. Just go back a minute. Yeah, so the stuff on page 103, that talks about, for example, different cultures, collective cultures, where they don't focus, for example, so much on individual happiness. But what I need to do is I need to do my best to make the whole group that I belong to help that work. Okay, so like I say, you might want to have a look at the exam practice stuff. When you've completed the 4 pages, the 4-page handout that goes along with this this PowerPoint and the textbook, make sure you then summarize that. And this is your work for the week. And make sure you summarize that onto the summary sheet, using the formula of strength, why it's a strength example, weakness, and so do that for all 6. And then just make sure you've learned that. Then we'll sort out an assessment. Okay, so stay safe, stay at home and indoors, and look after yourselves, look after your families, and I'll hopefully see you soon. Okay, so take care. Bye.